Good morning. I'm going to get situated here. All right. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are on the indigenous land of the Ingenuity and the M.U.G.A.B.E. people. It's important to recognize them not just for the sake of acknowledgement, but as a practice of active remembrance. Any work that we are to do in the process of healing our communities and land to advance justice and truth must start with engaging the sovereign indigenous people of this nation in dialogue and in embracing their leadership. It is not enough to just say their names. We must also make sure that we work diligently to advance their sovereignty as a part of freeing the land. So before I continue, I would ask that the elders that are gathered in this room today offer me permission to continue. Thank you. I'm calling my dark knight, Emmett Turner, that brave Harlemite, that straight-ahead jazz baritone singing soul that dedicated his world to those with the least. Now, 26 years in the ancestral realm, he guides me with the parts of his heart he left for me to hold. He makes my path clearer and my intentions and movements certain. I'm calling my grandparents, Emmett and Maurice Turner. They left the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina to seek refuge in the core of the Big Apple from the terror of white America's reconstructed South. They remind me that home is the place that you make wherever and whenever you enter a space. I'm calling Samuel and Epsie Roberts, my foundation, my soul providers, those that stayed in Mississippi because of indigeneity and because the generations of social conditioning of the South endowed them with the hope of a tomorrow yet to come. They were country conjurers of life from soil, womb, and faith. Grandma, she could make magic with just flour and lard. Each biscuit stamped with her 3-finger brand. In her kitchen, she took raw ingredients grown from her own land by her own hands and became the maker of Black Boy Joy. Granddaddy, his natural language was the land. He was a seed talker. He could talk a little itty-bitty seed into stretching deep through the soil to borrow the love of the mother planet. He would tell that itty-bitty seed to lift its head up and stretch its arms to the sky and give the world the happiness that it had inside. He spoke my growth. I'm calling my great and great-great-grands, the ones that I knew and the ones that I never met, but without whom I would not be. My mother's people, Will and Eliza Broadwater, Gus and Sarah Terry, and Edmund and Alice Kidd Broadwater. My mother's father's people, James and Leonia Roberts, George and Alice Washington, and Bob and Rosabelle Roberts. Ashe. I also call on those living and responsible for me being here today. Genevieve R. Turner, the personification of strength and love, straight country determination. Her hands were built to cradle, feed, and clothe babies. Her faith is, simply put, unshakable. Her generosity unrivaled. She is the matriarch of a Southern family working to root itself deeper in faith and unconditional love. I also call Brandy Turner, my partner of 24 years. Without her, I could not be here today. Together, we made 3. Jonathan, 20, a junior at the University of Southern Mississippi, and he didn't need any bribes to get in. Jana Lynn, 12, and Tristan Ali, almost 3. These 3 used their love to help me expose the places in my life where fear still resides. Ashe, back through time and forward to now. I'm the physical manifestation of all of their prayers. Those whispered on the winds blowing through 1,000 mighty oak trees, those written in the margins of old tattered Bibles, the ones placed on the leaves of 1,000,000 magnolia blooms, protected in the warm and dusty shoeboxes hidden beneath the bed, and sipped in that magical elixir sitting on grandma's windowsill, and planted in the corner of the cotton field down by the river. I am the next chapter in a book that has now only taken written form, but originated in the intentions of the human heart and sang as lullabies by elders to their children and passed on and on to each generation until the day that our song was stolen. But we still have the word, and the word is good. This word is a future prayer, wrapped in a keynote and delivered to tomorrow's past in hopes that seeds planted today will continue to grow even as the land changes. We know not what tomorrow may hold, but what we do know, as my way, way, way back ancestral roots know, is that we have the power to imprint on a generation in time that we will never see. So this one is from them, through me, to you. I start with my family, that unique and select few of the human species that loved me into existence. It's important to ground myself in this act of sacred remembrance because it's their love that allows me the space to remember who I am, to be reminded of my power, to begin with a reflection of an undeniable truth that there is no me without the collective love of this legacy. I am because they are. It was the days of the high top fade, baggy jeans, Jabot's, Mustang 5.0's, LL Cool J, and every day seemed to last an eternity. And in high school seemed to me where I would be forever. President George Bush had just declared war against a small Middle Eastern country in an attempt to root out terror against the civilized world. Homies was dipping rims and wearing Timbs and gold teeth and gold chains, and kids was smoking Mary Jane and going insane and killing each other over what set you claiming. Airplanes were falling from the sky, and everybody had a pager on their side to keep in touch with their friends, and making ends was the only reason most people got out of bed in the morning. Babies were having babies, crack made people crazy, and everybody wanted to be like Mike, wearing $100 tennis shoes despite the fight of public enemies don't believe the hype. Rap and hip hop must have flip-flopped because back then it was either the East Coast or the West Coast. But sitting in class was the most difficult. It was like sitting in church on Sunday morning as the preacher preached sermons, as the teacher teach lessons. My mind would drift off to uncharted worlds of beautiful girls lying on sandy beaches as golden sun rays pierced through partly cloudy skies with a 2% chance of becoming rich and famous. My thoughts were aimless, shooting for the stars and not even reaching the treetops. Fourth period was the toughest. Listening to Dr. Park's lecture on the impact of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet on modern day romance seemed especially hard on a recently filled stomach. I'd often find myself adrift amidst the pool of saliva across my wooden desk. But now I wonder what I missed. Because time moves on. That was 1992, now it's 2002, and not many things have changed. Players traded into gold and started rocking platinum chains. Kids killing their brain cells with cancer calling cell phones, and doctors are cloning kids, and kids are killing each other, and teachers, and Michael Jordan was still playing ball. His kicks are now $200 at the mall. And George Bush Jr. has just declared war against a small Middle Eastern country in an attempt to root out terror against the civilized world. And baby girl just had a baby girl. Planes are still falling from the sky. The Chronic is still how most kids choose to get high. And LL Cool J just dropped album number 25. But see, school is just a chore to the unchallenged mind. Y'all don't hear me. I said school is just a bore to the unchallenged mind. It's 2019 and school is still a bore to the unchallenged mind. School days, everybody wanna get away. Wanna play the games that grown-ups play, but the price you pay, you gotta take responsibility. School days, can't wait till graduation day. Pretty soon you'll be on your way, but someday you'll say, oh, how I miss those school days. I come from a family of educators. My mother is a retired teacher. She spent 40 years in the trenches. In her first year out of college, she began teaching in an all-black segregated high school in Meridian, Mississippi. After a year there and a disagreement with the principal, she became the first African-American teacher at a white public school after the statewide process of forced integration. Both my sisters are teachers. Carla is an agriculture teacher with a PhD in agriculture, teaching at a predominantly black school in Port Gibson, Mississippi. As a child, Carla's idea of playing with her friends entailed her pretending that they were all in school and she was the teacher. She would line her friends up in the hall and march them through the house from place to place and then take them to her room for seated instruction with chalkboard and all. Her friends never wanted to come to our house. My baby sister is an exceptional education teacher. She's a specialist in Palm Beach County, Florida, also on a quest for her PhD. Both my sisters married teachers. My first cousin that lives next door is a high school teacher and basketball coach. I am surrounded by teachers. You see, they get it honestly. Our community was known for producing teachers. But that was never my dream. My first dream was to become a professional bum. Yeah, for real. I wanted to be a bum. I wanted to just chill and be left to my own devices. I grew up in the country and I knew that I had all I needed to survive. It would be a solitary lifestyle with very few amenities, but I could always count on having a full belly and low stress levels if I just stuck to the basics: food, clothing, shelter. I was a teenager, and my thoughts were not yet fully developed. So it sounded reasonable to me, but to my parents, it was complete and utter nonsense. You see, they had been to college, and they were college educated, so it was only logical that I would be also. And that meant no time to consider a life of underachievement and mediocrity as they saw it. My dream was not my future. My sister still reminds my children of their father's childhood aspirations. She's a teacher, and I will never forgive her. So I ended up in college by the will of a force greater than my own. I knew I had to go, but I didn't make any types of preparation to make college a reality. I just kind of meandered my way through my senior year, still pontificating about this dream of becoming a bum, but because of a teacher that believed in me and a best friend that was a highly coveted football recruit, I landed a full scholarship to the University of Mississippi to work in the film room in the athletic department. Room, board, books, tutors, and gear in exchange for working alongside the football team and sacrificing my fall weekends to editing game film and crunching stats. It was there at the University of Mississippi that I began to understand how the concept of separate and unequal played itself out on schoolyards across the South, and especially in Mississippi. Ole Miss was a world that I wasn't accustomed to. I came from a family with two college-educated working parents that still couldn't manage to escape the structural poverty and racism of the quasi-post-Jim Crow South. I entered into Ole Miss at a time when they were still flying the Confederate battle flag at sporting events. I remember ESPN and ABC News being on campus interviewing student athletes about what it means to be black and play for a team with a plantation owner for a mascot, and waving the battle flag of the Civil War and those fighting to preserve the institution of slavery. Then, at the beginning of the semester, my father passed away. Needless to say, it was a very, very challenging freshman year. I wasn't prepared for school, any school, especially that school. And after the passing of my father, I lost whatever focus I had left, and before the end of my freshman year, I lost my scholarship. But let me back up a bit and tell you about my teachers. Of course, my first teachers were my parents. My mother was a culinary artist and a fashion designer, and never made much of a living at either. She taught home economics in high school and then taught culinary arts and trained students for the commercial food industry at Job Corps centers. So I grew up in a commercial kitchen and always wore the finest of handmade designer threads. My mother made all of these clothes. Ain't that a bad suit? Is that a bad suit or what? My father, he would sit us down on Saturday mornings after we had watched cartoons and Kung Fu theater and Soul Train and force us to listen to straight ahead jazz, the likes of Thelonious Monk, Miles Davis, Nina Simone, and Dave Brubeck and the Jazz Messengers. We were probably the only kids in our community listening to that music. My father's first response to any question that my siblings and I asked him was, well, what do you think? He molded us into critical thinkers. My first grade teacher was Miss Mullins. She was a glass mosaic artist and just an amazing creative soul. She infused art into our instruction and was later tapped to be the teacher of the short-lived gifted class. My brother and I tested into that program, and having an hour of day in an instructional setting that championed creative expression as a foundational tool for comprehension and meaning making in an academic setting was both a radical educational practice and a bait and switch of what the remainder of my post-third grade educational experience would be when they discontinued the gifted program. I joined the high school band in the 6th grade, and although I wanted to play the drums, I ended up getting stuck on the trombone. I hated the trombone. I didn't feel it, but I think every boy that auditioned for the band that year wanted to play the drums, and we needed more trombone players, so I got drafted. I played in the marching band, the concert band, and the jazz band. I was never really that great, but the process continued to cultivate the creativity that was first started at home before I could remember, and stretched through my time with Ms. Mullins and throughout high school. When I finally and reluctantly made it to college, I had to decide on a major to study. Just to show you how dumb I was, I picked English literature as a subject area because I thought it would be easy. In college, my brother, he never let up on his passion for music and jazz in particular. He studied jazz and music composition, and I was an English major by default, so we decided to combine our efforts and create a jazz-based hip-hop and spoken word performing group called M.U.G.A.B.E.E, Men Under Guidance Acting Before Early Extinction. Our name came in response to a newscast in the early 90s that said black men were an endangered species. Because of our dual cultural education in jazz and blues and gospel, the native languages of Harlem and the Mississippi Delta, our sound was original. We knew we were onto something, and so we dropped out of college in the spring of 1996 and set our sights on heading to NYC to make it in the music industry. We thought that we could harness the latent power of the music industry to spark a revival of consciousness in the black community and single-handedly reverse the multi-generational curses of enslavement, Jim Crow, and win the wars on drugs, poverty, and violence with a few well-crafted, catchy tunes. So, we journeyed to New York City in the fall of 1996 with stops in Chicago to pick up our cousins to complete our crew. We made it to New York City in September, and we're back home in time for Thanksgiving, broke. You see, it wasn't meant to happen that way. The type of change we were pursuing was transactional, shallow, and fleeting, based in an industry that mines talent to maximize profit and is based on a foundation of exploitation. The change we wanted to make was long-term investment. It uplifts transformation as the preferred currency, and it moves at the speed of relationships, which is the inverse of trend setting in pop culture. We started our first transformative work at Lanier High School in Jackson, Mississippi. Now, Lanier is the first African-American high school in the city of Jackson, and at the time that we were working there, it was also the home base for Bob Moses and the Algebra Project. We worked with poet Jolivet Anderson and teacher Ann Johnson in a program they created called My Mississippi Eyes, which uplifted cultural exploration as a tool for improving reading literacy and self-love. Through My Mississippi Eyes, we began creating relationships with other like-minded programs locally and regionally. This connected us through the legacy of the Deep South organizing to organizations like Students at the Center in New Orleans, and through the movement of the Great Migration to organizations like CAPE in Chicago and Acres in New York City. Through My Mississippi Eyes, we brought a busload of students from Jackson, Mississippi here to Chicago, and then on to Harlem to trace the route of the Great Migration. We learned with students and community leaders in both cities and cities about the historic and current influences of Southern African American culture on their cities. The following year, we took these same students on a trip to South Carolina to participate in an economic justice forum and presidential candidate forum. We were working intentionally to make sure that our young people weren't being victimized by what Bob Moses calls a sharecropper education, which is giving a population just enough education to keep them locked in second-class citizenship. This type of education isn't designed to produce full citizens or to teach them the skills to compete in a capitalist world. This type of education feeds the school-to-prison pipeline and continues to power a multi-generational cycle of poverty. I won't bore you with the statistics. Most of you already know them. And if you don't, they are easy enough to find if you care to be informed, because they are essential to the work that you're doing. Through My Mississippi Eyes and the Algebra Project, and later its offspring, the Young People's Project, we were collectively reverting portions of Lanier High School to community schools. a way of organizing local educational institutions to develop around community stakeholders that are invested in the success of the children because it impacts their own success and the collective success of their community. I say reverting because this was the framework for schools in the Black community during segregation. After a couple of really successful and inspiring years working as an artist in residence with the students of Lanier High School, the principal we were working with retired. The school board saw fit to hire a disciplinarian to be the next leader of this institution. In someone's version of the story, he was sent to Lanier to restore order. Upon trying to enter the school in the beginning of the third year of our work there, my brother and I were denied access and told that we needed to go through the central office to be cleared to work in the school. We went to central office and filled out the forms and checked the boxes, and we went back to the school over and over again over the course of the next few months several times and were denied each entry each time. The reason given is that our paperwork hadn't yet been cleared. In a year's time, the Algebra Project also ceased working there. So who benefits from our children's mediocrity? In 2001, I was introduced to Alternate Roots, an organization run by and serving artists that are doing work at the intersection of arts and social justice in the US South. I didn't know that this organization existed, but it filled in all the blanks of the process of doing the work that I was most interested in doing. They operated by a simple set of profound principles when working as an artist in community. Shared power, equal partnership, open dialogue, working towards individual and community transformation, and practicing an ethics that is rooted in transparency and accessibility. These principles became a guide for understanding how and why I was doing what I was doing as an artist. For the next 16 years, I will become fully immersed in this organization, its people, and its philosophy. I became a staff person in 2004, and became the executive director in 2009 and served in that capacity until 2018. It was through the influence of the success and failures of the work at Lanier and the learning and experience gained while at Alternate Roots, which stimulated me to dream of opening, of all things, a school. Can you believe that? Well, that was my dream. The man that had dreamt of being a professional bum now dreams of opening a school. The work of an artist is part-time daydreamer, part-time builder and maker, and full-time magician and conjurer. As I pulled this dream from the ethereal plane and began to figure out how to manifest and shape this old idea into a new thing in real time, the dream began to transform. I figured that if the issues we were dealing with in our small rural community of Utica, Mississippi were as comprehensive as we thought, then our approach to shifting the dynamics had to be just as sophisticated. In thinking about engaging the creativity and imagination of the young people, we realized that our entire community needed that same stimulation. The issues we were facing would require the entire community to see themselves as the primary audience of the solution. So we figured that the school approach would focus only on the young people. But what this work required was an intergenerational approach. And so we evolved the idea from a school into a comprehensive approach to community, social, economic, and cultural development through the dual approach of agriculture and art. And thus, the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production was born, also known as CIP Culture. CIP Culture works in three interconnected spaces: community-engaged design, cultural production, and community development. The community-engaged design means that the work begins and continues in the practice of a call and response. We make a call, the community responds. Sometimes that call is a question or an action. Sometimes the community response is with a question or sometimes with silence. But the work is driven by this principle of dialogue and shared power in designing and implementing the solutions our community needs. Cultural production means that we are working to shift our community mode from consumption to production. That production looks like growing food, participating in agriculture, making films, taking pictures, and telling stories. We own what we make. It also means that we're producing the culture that we want to be reflected in the stories and food systems we create. Community development means that we are aware that in order for our community to grow and thrive, we have to have a working economy. But economy includes money, but is so much more than money. It includes the very systems that make sure that we are working to develop agency, understand systems and policy making as a core responsibility to each other and to the community we give to the future. But most important, the SIP culture is a place where the community can dream about its future, build sound strategic analysis, and work to expand access to solutions and problems through design thinking and storytelling. In the dream, SIP culture is where our community goes to meditate on the future and cultivate the conditions for creative solutions, to root itself in a tradition of place and a spirit of creativity and imagination, to find the rhythm it needs to dance into an uncertain future. So we invited the teachers to our space for a non-alcoholic teachers happy hour. We asked them how they envision SIP culture spaces as an extension of the environment they are creating for their students. We asked them to think with us about how these spaces could be developed. We wanted to understand how the teachers might envision arts and culture as classroom tools. We asked the children how they envision these spaces as a generative space for their development and what role they should play in creating a space for them to grow. You see, the children are not our future. That freaks y'all out, right? The children are not our future. You see, one of the most important tenets of quality social engagement is the idea that our work as artists and community engagers is to support work by and with community, not to do work for and to community. Let me say that again. One of the most important tenets of quality social engagement is the idea that our work as artists and community engagers is to support work by and with community, not to do work for and to community. Community learns more by what they do and experience than by what is done to them or on their behalf. Simply put, the people know the solutions to their most pressing issues. They should be at the helm of solving those issues. And in the realm of education, this means that our schools must create space for the most impacted community, the youth, to have a stake in the conversations that help to both identify the issues and design the solutions to those issues. This is fundamental in shifting the paradigm that our current reality is stuck in. Too many people that are too far away from the problem are trying to make decisions that are ill-informed and driven by measurements that are insignificant in the grand scheme of designing the future we need to survive. Students and teachers are on the front lines. Their vision on the issues is spot on. Their understanding of the disconnect between what they're being asked to do and what they need to do to succeed is as close as we'll ever get to a crystal ball. We need to listen to them. The children are not the future. They are the now. They are leading us in ways that our generations have been afraid to. They are asking the difficult questions and are unafraid to step into the gap of change because their lives depend on it. That courage can frighten those that are afraid of change. But our work is to be in dialogue and partnership with that courage, to increase its capacity by creating conditions to amplify their creativity and exercise their imagination muscles so that they can develop a strong ability to manifest the future they need to be great. This is our work. This is our charge. I applaud you and what you do. I'm under no illusions as to how difficult your work is. I've been surrounded by teachers my entire life, raised by them. Your work is selfless, underappreciated, and exhausting. But your work is the most important to the continuation of the human species. Continue to move in your work with purpose. Remember why you do what you do. Embrace your creativity. Employ your imagination in service of your role as teacher and help your students to realize their greatness. They will love you for it. Remember, the children are not the future. They are now. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. We have a few minutes for questions.
Sure.
Are you open to
Sure.
that?
Sure. Some microphones?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've got just a few minutes for some questions for Mr. Turner. If anyone would like to have anything that you'd like to ask or address, we'll come around with the microphone.
It's one all the way up in the corner there.
Hang on to the microphone. We want to make sure.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
You mentioned the shared proper type of education that didn't prepare students to compete in the capitalistic society. Do you think that's really what we should be doing, or change the paradigm to move beyond capitalism and think of things more in a socialism?
I think that we have to prepare our children to be prepared for whatever future they need to create for themselves. I think it's really difficult. I don't believe in capitalism personally. It's the current system that we live in, so to not be prepared to live in that system is still preparing our children for failure. However, not preparing them with the imagination to imagine a world beyond capitalism is also preparing them for failure. So I think there's a dual role that we have to achieve, and it's some equilibrium that we have, some balance that we have to achieve in our work, is preparing the next generation to live by the standards that they feel like they need to create for themselves. Too much of our work as adults is thinking that we already know what they need when they grow up. But the world is going to be a completely different place than the world that we're living in today. And they need to have the ability to manage whatever the circumstances are around that moment. We don't know what it's going to be, so it's hard for us to say that their future should be socialism or communism or capitalist or whatever. They have to figure that out, but we're not giving them the tools to even critically have critical analysis or have the imagination to think beyond.
Hello.
Hello. Good morning.
How can we get involved in help support SIP? Is that a thing?
SIP culture. Money's always wonderful. We're a new organization. We started in 2017. We started our program with 18 months of community engaged dialogue before we really moved a muscle or created a plan, which means that we worked with the community to ask questions about what they needed before we began to say, this is what we're going to do. And so we are about 2.5 years into that process. We currently have 3 spaces. I'll see if I can go and show a quick slide on that. But we currently have 3 spaces that we're working out of or trying to develop as part of our work at SIP Culture. Those spaces are in the community of Utica, Mississippi. If you look at the bottom, we have an artist residency house, which is 3,000 square feet of amazingness that we're renovating currently into an artist residency space, a media lab in our offices with a greenhouse and about 1.5 acres of edible gardens. We also have a 4,000 square foot Main Street space that we're turning into a commercial kitchen, media lab, and helping to provide broadband access to our rural community, which sorely lacks access to the digital infrastructure. And then we have 17 acres of green space that is on the corner here, which is on the back side of our elementary and middle school. So you can go to sipculture.com, see the work that we're doing. We'd love you to make a donation, but we're also looking for work exchanges to have people come down and support the development as we move through. We have a 3-week digiculture lab for young people in the summer that teaches them both the curriculum of agriculture as well as media making film. Anybody that's really interested, just reach out to us and we can connect with you. And thank you for that question.
I want to thank you for your comments. They're very inspiring and I think show a lot of potential for what we can do for our students. But I'm really curious about the whole federal and state and city idea of every kid has to go to college. College at all costs. That is the route. You got to go to college. college, and without sort of the why are we going to college, what are we going to get out of college, what are we going to get at the end of college. And I'm wondering how you approach high school students who are getting this messaging, and do you encourage them to look outside of college and think about alternate paths? I just wonder your thoughts on that in general.
Sure. So college is a for-profit business. First and foremost, it's there to make profits, it's there to turn as many students through as possible, and it's creating debt and really burdening not just our nation, but it's burdening individual families with basically making our work coming out of college as indentured servants. So the impact that this has is our ability to move out of college and chase and follow dreams in our imagination to create something different is hindered because we have to come straight out of college and start making money because those loans are about to, they're about to be collecting. And this is a trend that is a recent trend that started, in the latter part of the 20th century. And we have to figure out ways to dismantle that. So we have to decolonize higher education. We have to decolonize all of our educational institutions, starting with the entry points for young people into the education system. But when I talk to young people, what I try to help them understand is there's ways to get an education and try to stay as debt-free as possible. It's the one thing that I promised to my son is that I would help him to graduate from college if that's what he wanted to do with no debt. And what he does beyond getting his bachelor's degree is really his choice as an individual, depending on the path that he wants to take. It's a privilege to be able to do that, and I totally understand it. But it meant he had to take the community college route for the first 2 years of school, and we were able to pay that as we go, which, for 2 years it was $3,400 for an associate's degree. You can't beat that. You're getting the same instruction that you would need at the university level, and then when you go to university, you're prepared and you're not, lugging around a bunch of debt. He was able to get his grades in a place in which he was able to get an academic scholarship for the university, so that's helping to support. So, there's all types of ways. Anybody who prescribes any one way of doing anything is an idiot. There's so many different ways to move through life, and the whole point is that we're not teaching critical thinking skills. And critical thinking is essential to being able to navigate whatever structures, to even find yourself and be able to navigate and understand how to read a map, or even, whatever. Critical thinking is the most important skill we can teach. We can't dictate the future. It's not our role. What we can do is prepare young people for the type of skills that they'll need to navigate themselves through whatever challenges they face in the coming years. And they're going to face considerably different challenges at a greater magnitude than anything that we can imagine.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, first I'd like to commend you. I have people from Jackson, Mississippi.
That's what's up.
And some of my relatives actually attended in high school.
All right.
I was basically wanting to find out a little bit more about the program because I'm going to be calling down Mississippi today and let them know about what you have.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you, brother. So please just tell them, check out Sip Culture. We're actually pretty easy to find, and we host an artist event. Actually, we'll have one next Thursday in Jackson. But yeah, please, I can give you a card after this is over, and you can connect with your folks. And I know that Chicago is nothing but extreme North Mississippi. And so I got my folks on the South Side. I'm going to see when I leave here this evening. Yeah.
Hi, Jordan with Everybody Dance Now. Thank you.
Hello.
You encourage efforts to do work with the community as opposed to for a community. What is your approach at SIP and to strategize, especially here with, I guess, a lot of us are arts partners and trying to collaborate, or what is that approach?
Yeah, so as I was sharing earlier, we start with a community engaged design process. So we are working with the Gulf Coast Community Design Studio as a design partner. They are an organization that is from the Architectural School of Architecture and Art and Design at Mississippi State University. And so they've been our partners in developing these spaces in which we engage the community in mapping processes and understanding what their roles are, narratives, histories about what the community has been. All of these conversations are about helping to inform both where the community sees itself, how it wants to move forward, and how do we begin to build the infrastructures to develop the type of future that they want to see for themselves. And so our work has been all about this dialogue. The dialogue is the work. And what happens in the dialogue is you're developing relationships that then allow for a critical conversation to happen within communities that is not taking place right now because there's really no infrastructure for those critical conversations to happen. And so the intent of the work is to develop the capacity for the community to have these conversations while at the same time creating space that is actually cultivating and supporting the ability for people to bring their dreams, their ideas, their imagination, and then begin to shift that into an actual reality, to manifest those dreams into a physical manifestation. And so the work is just, it's slow work, it's long-term work. We're investing 20 years in this work to see if it's viable, if it works, and what we can do, the type of change we can make in a generation. So, you know, it's a different way of working than we're used to, especially in a society that is, everything has to happen immediately, and the results have to take place within a grant cycle, and you have to measure things that actually don't really make sense for the community that you're working with because they're important to the people who gave you the money, and all of those are not ways to actually shift the paradigms that we're working in. All right. Thank you all so much for your time, and thank you for the invitation to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Carlton Turner.
Thank you.
And I think your response to this last question for me was so important that I think to carry into today. We had the opportunity to really collaborate and talk to each other during this space, so I encourage you to talk with people you don't know, talk with people from the school, talk with people from an arts partner organization, teaching artists. I think we have a great opportunity ahead of us. So we are pushing on, and on time, I'm going to hand it over to Julia for a quick introduction.
So, thank you again to Carlton. That was wonderful to hear from you. I'm thrilled to introduce Chief Maurice Turner, who wants to quickly introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. I said I would not stand behind the podium after that. Just bad move, bad move. It is so exciting to see so many spatial minds and brains, thought leaders in one space. My father was a drummer. My grandmother and my great-grandmother were pianists. The reason why I moved to Chicago, I'm originally from New Orleans, and I moved to Chicago motivated by a poem from students from Steinmetz who did a poem called A Lost Count. So when people say, like, how did you end up in Chicago? I said I was inspired by young people whose voices resonated with me. So the kinds of work that you all do is so critically important. You have such a great advocate, like a real advocate, who is like, we need more programs like, hey Julie, yes, we do. And so my hope, and please don't lose your voice or allow traditional academia, even at the central office, even us, to cause programs to be lost. The more we see us in spaces like this and have the contextual language of why we need spatial thinkers, movement and design, and culinary fashion, we need you. Art is healing when books cannot, and so I just hope that you continue to do this work, that you feel inspired, and that you continue to say what we need because you have someone who is dedicated to this work as well. Thank you, and we appreciate you.
And on one final program note, sessions begin sharply at 10 a.m. Before you start moving, I just wanted to highlight Mr. Turner is doing a workshop session this afternoon. It's the last session of the day, and so we hope that you will stick around for it. It does have a slightly bigger capacity, but that is sure to be a real treat today.
Have a wonderful day.
Have
We'll
fun.
see you back here later.